Autism Career Pathways. And today I have a special guest, Dr. Tara Regan.
Mm-hmm.
And she is going to share with us her journey as a neurotypical sibling. She's the eldest in a family of three
Actually,
kids.
four.
Four. Oh, four.
Yeah, there's
Sorry.
four of us
Yeah.
kids.
So Tara has two adult brothers diagnosed with autism. So today we're going to talk about all things related with living with a diagnosis. And she has two family members diagnosed with autism. So Tara, can you tell us more about your family?
Yeah, I would love to. They're my favorite group to talk about and topic, honestly,
Yes.
because they definitely have informed my professional background and everything I do today with our nonprofit. Yes, so I am the oldest of four kids. It's kind of broken for four T names, like for all T's. So it's me, my brother Tyler, he's 28. My sister Tasha's in the middle. She's also neurotypical. So both the girls are neurotypical. And then the youngest is Tanner, and he's 20. So they, as you can tell, there's a bit of an age difference between the oldest two and the youngest two. That has definitely like shaped my experience that we'll get into. Because I am the oldest, I kind of took on a caregiver role fairly early on. And all of the diagnoses as they occurred were mid to late 90s to early 2000s. And that was a unique time on its own to get an ASD diagnosis because the prevalence rate was just so drastically different. And then we were also in North Dakota. My dad was in the Air Force at the time. He's retired now. And so that was certainly a unique experience, being in a very rural community, but also having access to services from the military. So that's really shaped our experiences from there. And we're all now in North Carolina. My family lives in Charlotte.
Yeah. Take us to your earlier journey in autism. Do you remember much about the time when your brothers got a diagnosis? What was it like for your parents? It must have been really stressful. Do you remember how they explained the diagnosis to you? So do you remember?
For Tyler, I do not know.
Okay.
I don't remember that happening. I just remember that being part of the conversation and me always kind of advocating and telling my friends about him and what his strengths and needs and interests were, especially if they would come over and hang out with us, because he would make an appearance and come hang out. My mom also ran a daycare at home. So there were always like little kids running around us. And so that was often a point of discussion with a lot of kiddos. And as it happened, my mom ended up becoming like this, I don't know, like one of the first probably neurodiverse daycares, because families knew that she had two boys on the spectrum. So they would be more interested in dropping their kiddos off if they had ADHD or some other diagnosis. So it was a lot of, I guess, exposure, just like it was a part of my everyday, kind of the thread of my experience as a child, because Tyler's only 2 years younger than me. We did get the diagnosis, I think I want to say 96, 97. So I was starting elementary school at that time period, and I do have distinct memories of him being in classrooms near me in the same school, and his teachers would often seek me out to just provide some additional help here and there, or I would go visit him. And then my youngest brother, Tanner, I definitely remember that diagnosis a lot more. I was in the room when it happened. I think for Tyler, I was probably babysat, or they're like, well, my parents brought him in for the diagnosis. But Tanner was definitely more of a process for us. The diagnosis wasn't an easy thing. That is what I was definitely aware of. I went to most of the appointments with my dad because it was just fun to go on different trips with him. In North Dakota, it was just like great to get away from the base sometimes and go on these little adventures with him. And I would go with my youngest brother. and they did a lot of ruling out diagnoses. They tested hearing. So that was where I first learned that's where you bring the audiologists in there. So I got to essentially see the diagnosis team process happen. Yeah. And then when he finally got the diagnosis, that was over a year later, but they were also extremely certain with Tanner, because they saw with Tyler some of the similarities. My brothers are both very, very different now, but there were a lot of similarities that they picked up on. So they actually got the diagnosis a lot earlier when he was 2, or right around 2. And we actually had to drive 5 hours away to Fargo, and we all went as a family, stayed overnight, and did the appointments. So I was there for that. And it didn't, my parents were pretty great at, I don't want to say hiding, but like hiding their stress or their grief for this process. I think they were both very resilient and wanted to be really supportive of my brothers and just help them to be happy and safe. And I think that's really what's been so critical, I think, with all of us growing up together, and that's impacted how I think about autism too.
Yeah. So as a parent coach, I ask parents to send me video clips of just family hangouts. And of course, a neurotypical family member is often in the picture. And I often see a video clip of like an older neurotypical sibling interacting with autistic younger brother, but it looks like big sister was doing therapy to the autistic brother. And that always gave me such an insight of like how parents actually approach the autism and how they communicate with the autistic son or daughter. And, you know, their neurotypical siblings usually just pick up that kind of communication style. It's not even communication, it's more instructional based. It's like little therapists, basically, or a teen therapist. And I was thinking, wow, that person is ready to go to work as a therapist through these experiences of, you know, being a neurotypical sibling, but that's not necessarily what we want. So do you remember if your parents ever put you in a spot or give you responsibility because you were the eldest, as well as your neurotypical sister, if they ask you to practice certain skills or, you know, do more or understand more because you're neurotypical, you know? And I think as a parent myself, that's hard not to do, because you just, like, in your mind, maybe, well, you know, my daughter should be able to do that because she's neurotypical, you know, and that's not good. That's not good to do all the time. But what do you remember about that at all?
Yeah, definitely. We didn't, so interestingly enough, I think you'll find this really interesting. We never had anyone come in our home to provide services ever. That just wasn't an option for us too. I think if that had been, my parents probably would have pursued it. But my brother's special education teachers in North Dakota were highly experienced. Like, they had access to teach methodology and visual supports very early on, and would often prescribe those for us too and send them home. So they were everywhere here at various time points when we're like, oh, let's get this into play. So I think I also saw myself become one of those like mini therapists myself, just because I was just really interested. I was like, what is autism? I would go to our library, try to search things up on the internet when that was available. And I would often be the one to pass along books to my parents.
Yes, right.
So I kind of took that into my own hands. My parents did think about different interventions over time, from like audio therapy to the gluten-free diet. We tried that a couple of times that we'll get into a little bit later, but with those, that was really impacted the family too. So I think it was just assumed I would participate, or I would be a part of it too, because I was just very interested in learning more and being a part of the caregiving, especially as everyone got older. My sister and I have largely different experiences, I would say. I think it's a teensy bit different now, just because she's in the middle and she was so young throughout all of this. I think she got to have more of her own space to spend time by herself and less of that time towards caregiving like I was, just because of my age and probably maybe more so my interests. And like that's carried on even up till now. Like everything I learn, I'm like, hey, mom and dad, let's talk about this. Let's see how we can get this going.
Yeah. Do you remember doing activities, vacations together, like family togetherness, which I think is very, very important. Not every family actually get to travel, you know, and everything just, life is consumed by the autism itself. And many parents actually forget life shouldn't be just about fixing the autism. Life is about being a family. And I'm curious to see what's your experience when you think about your family overall?
Really good question. I would say autism definitely has been a big part of the reason why we haven't done as many vacations as we could have. But that was also because of like low resources and where we were living at the time. It definitely has helped since moving down to North Carolina, and that everyone's gotten a little bit older, that we could all go together to a place like Disney World, which we've been to many, many times at this point, because that's both of my brother's favorite thing and special interest is Disney. But before that too, though, I do have distinct memories of not being able to go certain places or certain vacations because we were so worried about someone running away or escaping. I do have distinct memories of when that had happened with Tyler. Like we went to go visit family down in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we did a big family trip together. One of the first big ones we'd ever done. I was 12 at the time, Tyler was 10, and we were all walking through the zoo together, and we look around and Tyler's gone. And that was like the scariest thing, an autism parent's nightmare for sure, especially knowing that Tyler, up until maybe the year before, had the tendency to escape and elope. And he walked back to us. He made it back to us maybe an hour or so later, and he was like the happiest guy in the world. But we were just so scared. And that was really a point where my mom, we still remember that moment as like one of the scariest things that had happened. And that definitely had shaped what family visits would look like and vacations would look like from there on, and providing more structure, more preventative type of things to make sure that he is safe and that we could do more of these things in the future. But those ended up happening later on as we all got older.
So you're saying that as everyone gets older, it does get a little bit easier. That's good. That's
for us at least.
I think that is in most cases. I think some things get better, maybe with additional support or activities outside of home that might become available. So as a sister, like, how do you view your brother's autism? Do you view the autism itself, or do you view them as your brother with all the wonderful and annoying things that
of course
little brothers do? Like, has that changed over the years, your view, the way you see them, the way you interact with them?
I definitely see them first, especially as a brother. Our dynamics are like classic sibling dynamics. We like to pull pranks and jokes on each other. And I especially love that, like, my brothers, both of their senses of humor have like developed over time to the point where that has like shaped our sibling relationships too. And I feel like we have like a common language with each other, like our own specific language
Yeah.
relationship wise.
Yeah.
But I do see, since working in autism more so, that has helped me understand them better too.
Right.
Very early on in college, I got involved with a camp local to me called Camp Royal that the Autism Society of North Carolina runs. And I spent many summers there. I still do. I come back as a trainer and consultant here and there. But through that camp and working there so many summers, I got to interact with thousands of people on the spectrum across the lifespan and across support levels. And that really has been incredible for me to connect with my brothers even better, I think.
Yeah. Where relationships evolve and change. And I just want to ask you to tell your parents that they have done a wonderful job. I know I only know you, but your advocacy and your interviews, your podcasts, it shows a lot how their mindset as parents. It's wonderful. So make sure you tell them that.
I will.
Yeah. So that brings me this important question. If you were to talk to young parents or parents of a newly diagnosed child, and if this couple also has neurotypical child or two, what would be your advice to them as they begin this journey of navigating life with an atypically developing young child?
Yeah, so there are a lot of pieces there to think about. And the first thing I always like to say is to give yourself grace, because you will make mistakes and that's okay. I know my parents often look back and they're like, oh, I shouldn't have done, given Tara all of that load at that one point, or this different thing. But yeah, the giving yourself grace thing is so important with all of your children, and to know that you can and will build distinct relationships with each one of your children is going to be a really wonderful thing to see, especially as they get older. I think that will be the key thing, is just to meet your child where they are, all of your children where they are.
All of your children, not just the one who's autistic, but all of your children. Yes,
absolutely. And that includes giving time and space as needed. That's a hard thing to balance, but it's totally possible.
Yeah, that's a very, very good advice. So I want to make sure that we end with information about your nonprofit and about you, so people can find you and find your podcast. So go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Maisie. Well, you were on our podcast, so thanks for mentioning that. You'll have to, everyone has to check out Maisie's episode, because that's a wonderful one too, about all the work she's done and is continuing to do. And that's one of the many resources we offer through our resource center. The nonprofit I founded and run is called Autism Grown Up, and we're primarily online, so you can find us at autismgrownup.com, and that's where you'll find our resource center, including the podcast, as well as a library of guides, checklists, PDFs, all that good stuff. And then we have an online community filled to the brim with so many people on the spectrum, family members and professionals, having conversations about growing up.
And also Dr. Temple Grandin, so don't miss that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, she's coming up on our podcast very, very soon. I got to talk to her a while ago. So that was such a great conversation, just about employment and adulthood. It's so important to think about. And we're all over social media, so you can easily find us there too.
On LinkedIn, Instagram, not sure, I'm assuming you're on Facebook, so make sure you find Autism Grown Up. This was very, very good. Thank you for sharing your family journey, and we have to do this again on other topics.
I'd be happy to come on again in the future. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you so much.